The dSupportSuite Management Console is used to create and deploy configuration sets for your remote copies of the dSupportSuite client software, which is what you would install on a customer's machine. When you first start the Management Console, it should check for updates to itself and alert you if there are any. It will also re-download your client ID subscription data from your FTP server, which it will continue to do every 10 minutes as long as the program is running. It wants to make sure that subscription data is current from the server. I have to warn you that you can't really run more than one copy of the Management Console at a time on different computers. Don't recommend that because the Management Console exchanges configuration files with the FTP server. If you have multiple copies of the Management Console open and you make changes in one copy, you could have those changes not sync to the other copy and they could be overwritten by something the other copy does. So you always want to make sure that you're using just one copy so that all of your information is current. Now let's look at the main interface. We have a main list here, which is used for your client IDs. A client ID contains a configuration set for the dSupportSuite client software, which is installed on your customers' machines. A single client ID is typically created for each different customer you have using the client software and is used for all machines belonging to that customer. Sometimes you want to have multiple client IDs for the same customer. If, for example, you need to have a different configuration for dSupportSuite for certain workstations or servers, and especially you do want a different configuration generally for a server than you do for a workstation. So sometimes it is necessary to have two client IDs per customer. That's okay. You can name your client ID whatever you want. I should also specify that you don't want to name anything you can't name a file or directory, because the client ID names are used in FTP directory names. So let me just show you some of the things you can do with the client ID or the list. First off, we have the list options here, which allows you to sort by date or name. You can refresh the list, which will re-download the information from the server. And we have some advanced options, which you probably should only do if instructed by support. Above that, we have with selected button, and that's when you have any one or more client IDs selected here. When that drops down, you can, the first two items you can reconfigure or save a config as a template. Then with multiple client IDs, you can re-download the config and rules from the server. You can upload the configs to the server, upload the rules to the server, or upload both. And by config and rules, I mean the items that you're going to create with your dSupportSuite client software configuration. We'll get to that soon. And of course, you can also remove a client ID. When you remove a client ID, it will cause the software to be uninstalled from the remote computer. Okay. Then we also have a new client ID button and a search box where you can filter through your client IDs. The next thing you'll notice is we have a list box here for templates under the Manage Templates sub-tab. And we can create a new template, copy a template, or delete a template. Once you actually have some templates in this list and you have some client IDs in this list, you can overwrite a client ID with the template. You can overwrite just the rules. And by rules, we're talking about event monitoring rules, but we'll get to that in the client software configuration. And if you have multiple client IDs selected, you can overwrite all of them with the same template or rules, and it will automatically upload those to the server so the changes will propagate to your customers. It doesn't really matter if you create a client ID first or a template first, because you can always copy one to the other. Copying a template to a client ID with these buttons, or copying a client ID back to a template with this option here, Save Config as Template. Moving along, we have a Create Setup Installers tab. This is going to give you your option to create a setup installer, which is a single executable which will install the client software on a customer's computer. This setup installer is created from a client ID. So if you need to add a new client, typically the first thing you're going to do is create a new client ID. With that new client ID, you will copy a config from a template or design your own configuration. Then you will create a setup installer. That setup installer is then used to install the software on your customer's computer. You can actually have a generic installer with this tab, which is created based on a certain client ID's configuration, but can be used for any client ID at the time of install. Then you have the default, which is a customized installer. Now this installer can only be used for the client ID that you use to create it. Anytime you use this installer to install the software, in other words, it will always pull the config from the server for that client ID. Among these options, of course, you can embed client data, so you can put the client's name, email address, and phone number, and have all of that embedded in the installer so the client doesn't need to enter that after installation. And that's, of course, is used for identifying purposes in the email alerts section. And finally, up in our tabs up top, we have Manage Restrictions. This is where you will manage the restrictions for all of your client IDs. You can disable the application launch, disable the custom buttons, the fix button, the maintenance, or you can choose to uninstall the app. You can also, anytime a customer tries to use one of these restricted functions, you can have it show a URL, which may remind them to renew their subscription or whatever. Then you'll use the save and upload button to save those changes. Now, if you need to make any more further changes or more detailed changes to the configuration to change something or disable something, you can do that from within the configuration itself. Finally, we have the DSS client software at the top, and you'll see we have a current version, a local version, deployed version, and revert version. Current version is the current version that's out there. It's the latest version that I have on the website available for download. Local version is the version that you're working with, that you're using to configure your client IDs and templates. That local version you always want to keep updated if you want the latest features and configuration possibilities. And of course, you'll update the local version using this button here. Moving on, we have our deployed version. And the deployed version is the version that you have on your server, which is available for your client IDs to update to. So for example, if you deploy the current version 3.9.21, and you have a customer, if you have a customer out there with a previous version of the software installed, if 3.9.21 is your deployed version, then that customer's software will update itself to the current version, 3.9.21, if it is an earlier version. Now, if you don't have a deployed version, their software will never update. If your deployed version is out of date, then your client software will only update as far as that deployed version. This is so you can control which versions that your customers receive. You don't want to deploy a new version that has a bug in it, for example. So if I do release a new version and something ends up being wrong with it, you don't have to deploy it to your customers. You can wait until a fix is released. Now, if you have already deployed that new version to your customers, we have a revert version. The revert version is the previously deployed version that you used. So if I deploy a version now, it will be 3.9.21, and that will be the version that everyone can update to. If I come out with an update soon and then deploy the new version 3.9.22 or above, the revert version will become 3.9.21, And that's what you'll be able to roll your customers back to in the event of any trouble. This is all accomplished through the client software deployment option in the menu here. And we have three options. Create DSS client update zip. This creates the update zip file. Then we have deploy DSS client update. I'm not really sure why I made that two options. I think I'm going to go back and combine those. So then we also have recall deployed DSS client. That's what puts your revert version back on the server. Once the revert version is back on the server, that's what everyone will update to. Finally, I have one option in the options menu I haven't talked about, and that's the FTP Explorer. FTP Explorer is essentially just going to give you a quick view of your FTP file system on the server. I have had issues before where something funky may happen. Maybe you have to delete a file on the server. You can do that through here. Or if you have something up there you want to download and whatnot, upload separately, you can do that through here. And this concludes our tour of the dSupportSuite Management Console.